Welcome everyone to our Artist Talk with Rosa Leff. Rosa Leff contemplates the notion of adulting and how the current pandemic has altered the routine stuff of life in her solo exhibition, Expectation Reality. According to Rosa, sheltering in place and social distancing have forced everyone into the type of navel gazing normally associated with whiny millennials. 2020 has leveled the playing field, she says. Whether you've been home since March or going to work every day, it seems we've all been taking a little time to reflect on how we live, what we value, and what we truly want out of life once it's safe enough to get out. Each piece in this collection is hand cut from a single sheet of paper using an X-Acto knife. In Rosa's hands, the traditional folk art of paper cutting gets a contemporary and personal spin, sparing none of its interesting paper towels formed into lacy doilies with fly and humorous sausages that speak of a plain white paper plate becomes fanciful with an elaborate cutout of dragons reminiscent of those printed on Chinese takeout menus. Leff codes a paper crown with symbols of modern day indulgences and preoccupations. Boardwalk and beach scenes conjure the fun possibilities of summer that never came to full fruition. At the same time, once bustling cityscapes based on photos Rosa has taken in her home city of Baltimore are devoid of people and appear lonely and abandoned. These and other works in Expectation Reality remind viewers of what Leff calls the before times, contrasted to the stark reality of now. Then if we could play Rosa's video.
This show began as a reflection on adulting and the American dream. When I set out to create these works, I was thinking about BuzzFeed-type listicle fails and the many, many, many half-joking complaints people have about millennials. As with any body of work, my ideas about expectation versus reality evolved. I began thinking more about the goals my parents had for me. I certainly wasn't supposed to be an artist, but here we are. I inherited the family silver, but I've only opened the chest where it's stashed once. I have crystal glasses sitting pretty in a china cabinet, but I'm much more likely to be drinking out of a pint glass or solo cup. But the fact of the matter is that however big or small these failures have resulted in a wonderful life. That really helped create the lighthearted playfulness that I envisioned from the start. You can see that in pieces like Everybody's Doing It, a paper Wendy's cup cut with a Budweiser label. Sure, we know we're not supposed to drink outside, but oh wait, 2020 changed all the rules. Those of us who had previously felt guilty for spending our evenings binge-watching whatever garbage on Netflix were suddenly joined by highly functioning individuals with their whole lives seemingly put together from every strata of society. This truly unprecedented year has given us all a reason to, and an urgency about, reflecting on our lives. Are we where we want to be? Where and who do we want to be on the other side of this? And, most importantly, what do we really value? When everything about your life suddenly feels different, you can't help but wonder. I've been a believer in meditation for years and feel lucky to have brought that practice both into my art and into quarantine. It's how I was able to make something beautiful from dark memories like Let Them Eat Plate or To Begin Again. Let Them Eat Plate is about my parents' inability to make a budget when I was young and the hardship that sometimes resulted from that. To Begin Again is about how relieved and cleansed I felt the moment I uninvited my mother for my own wedding. It seemed like a drastic decision to some, but those who know me best were so supportive that I was instantly aware, like some sort of blinding revelation, that I had all the family I needed. That chosen family can be the best family. And in fact, that chosen family is featured in several of these cuts, like Vacation Forever, in which my friend reaches out for her now fiancé.
Hey, Rosa, you want to finish what this picture is about?
Sure. So this is my friend reaching out for her now fiance. And I think this piece was just really fitting for the collection because I can't remember for the life of me what it was that she was asking for. You know, I don't know if she was like looking for the cheese puffs or if she needed a beer or what was going on, but it was just this idea of like being stuck in place and her really not wanting to get up from there. And I think we've all had that experience of not wanting vacation to end. And for some of us, depending on what your circumstances are, quarantine has kind of been a little too much of that.
Right.
You know, for me, I'm working from home, so I have a lot more free time right now, but it would kind of be nice to get back into a regular routine.
So welcome, Rosa. Welcome to tonight's conversation. And we had a great conversation a couple of weeks ago.
Joyce McCartan. I teach a class.
I want to begin with asking you to describe your artistry. Describe what it is that you do.
So all of my work is paper cut. Things like the landscapes that you see, anything with people in it, mostly starts from my original photographs. So I take them during my travels, or in the case of a pandemic, like while I'm out walking the dogs and just hanging out in the neighborhood. And another cool thing that happens is that I now have some friends and some collectors who've gotten a feel for my style. So they've started taking photos, and they'll say like, hey, you have to go to this intersection. I saw a really awesome crumbling brick wall. Like, you have to go take better pictures of it. You have to cut it. So I print out these pictures, and I just print them out in black and white. I don't really do a lot of digital editing. And I think that that's something that's distinct from a lot of paper cutters for me, is that I prefer to do that manually. As I start cutting, I'll kind of draw on top of them, and I'm reversing positive and negative and cutting through both layers. So these printed photographs are taped down onto the, you know, in the case of Vacation Forever, which you just saw, it's taped onto that silver paper.
How did you discover paper cutting? And talk a little bit about its history as you know it.
Yeah, so I came across paper cutting kind of accidentally. I was in graduate school. I have a master's in elementary education. I see some of my teacher friends here. But I was working on a project that was to create a children's book for the grade you were teaching. At the time, I was doing my student teaching in 4th grade. And grad school is really stressful. I was just feeling kind of overwhelmed, and I hadn't made art in a really long time. So I, like on a whim, bought an X-Acto knife and this little tiny cutting mat. And that was my first time trying out paper cutting. And it was really, really fun. And it was like good stress relief. So I kind of, you know, let it get out of hand from there, with some delays and some distractions from being a new teacher and everything. But paper cutting started in China, and I actually had in 2019 the opportunity to go to Xi'an, which is at the start of the Silk Road where paper was invented. So it started there and then traveled, you know, throughout Europe, the Muslim world, and eventually came to the Americas. So there's really awesome, distinct paper cutting traditions, like Polish Wycinaki, which is folded and layered paper, and a lot of floral motifs. There's Mexican papel picado, which are the tissue paper banners, which are done with hammers and chisels. And they literally like hammer the chisels through the layers of paper. You know, German and Swiss Scherenschnitt. So there's a lot of different styles depending on where you are.
Talk about how you got to go to China and what you did there.
So I am on the board of the Guild of American Paper Cutters. And through them, I got connected with a friend of mine, Alice, who had gone and randomly met another paper cutter while she was in Mongolia in the 90s. And he became the chairman of the Xianyang Paper Cutters Association. His name is Han Jing. So he had reached out to her and said, I'm putting together this exhibition. It's, every year it alternates between China and Japan. But for the first time, they were inviting American artists, and he asked, you know, if she knew anybody who she thought would be a good fit for it. And she reached out to me and asked if I would be interested, and kind of came together from there. So a lot of happy accidents.
And you also studied in Cuba.
I did, yeah. In 2009, I studied abroad in Cuba. My undergrad is from Sarah Lawrence College, and they are one of very few American schools that had a program before the embargo. So they were grandfathered in, and they still have to, you know, reapply and request permission to go each year, but they have been allowed in every year since. So I studied at the Instituto Superior de Artes with an artist named Alejandro Cordobés, and he's very locally respected in Cuba. He's got some work in the National Museum there, and he does at the time he was working on very kind of fanciful pictures of garden gnomes and mushrooms and fairies. And it was just fun because his style is so different from anything I've been into then or now. So it was really, you know, a good challenge for me.
How do you think your experience there informed what you do today?
When I was with him, I was learning about line work, and we were really just similarly to what I'm doing now, working with very limited color palettes intentionally. I did some work with colored pencils, but mostly just, black and white. What kind of a shadow can I give if I put a thicker line on something versus making it more delicate, more faint? And I think that that's really important in paper cutting because you don't get a grayscale, right? Everything that I'm doing, if I'm translating a photograph into a paper cut, I have to decide what part of the shadow am I going to keep, what part am I going to cut away? And I think really understanding a line in that way is a big help.
So that book you were working on in graduate school, what became of it? Talk about the book. What was it?
So it was a story about my two stuffed animals. And it's like, I guess it's kind of Toy Story-esque, but basically they like fall off of the bed and get lost. And then there's this challenge and they're trying to find each other. Nothing ever happened with it. I never tried to publish it or anything like that. But in cleaning out my basement during the pandemic, I actually just found it again. So it's kind of fun to look back through it now and realize how awful those cuts are. And, realizing now that I've been doing it for 10 years that I'm a lot better at paper cutting. And, it would be interesting to try and recut some of the same images for sure and see what I could do with them now.
Tell us about your process. You paper cut from pictures you take, but you also do things like when you, for your work, let them eat plate of your paper towel doilies. Those aren't from photos. So talk a little bit about the things you just do from your head and then what you do from photos.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more digital work on the front end with pieces like Let Them Eat Plate or those paper towels. So that started as kind of a design collage, and I found that beautiful brocade background and then an illustration of Marie Antoinette that I modified and combined those two. So it's, other than that, once I have the design, it's the same process of figuring out, that 5.5-inch center on the paper plate, making my template that's going to match that. And then again, taping it down just with painter's tape or with paper's tape and using my X-Acto knife to cut through both layers. And then just ripping off that regular printer's paper when I'm done.
Now, when you work, are there several versions you do, like when artists draw or paint, they might do several versions of something. Do you go through several versions, or sometimes is your first attempt your masterpiece?
Depends on the day. Something like that, I would definitely sketch out first and play around with different combinations of patterned backgrounds, like that brocade wallpaper. There were definitely some like lace things that I tried to work in first that just felt too delicate. And I wanted something that was a little higher impact for it. But once I start cutting, usually that will be the finished piece. Fortunately, I don't have too many mistakes where I have to start over. The paper towels, I would say, have the highest failure rate. Those are very, very thin. So it's hard to get those to where I want them.
I want you to talk a little bit about your background because you came from a creative background. Talk about your grandmother and your father and what they did.
Oh yeah, I don't know if you can actually see it up here. I've got, sorry, my camera's not very good right now. My grandmother was an oil painter. She made her living that way. So my stepfather adopted me when I was 8 years old, so she became my grandmother. And I grew up kind of just painting with her and hanging out in her studio, and she was always working on commissions, and if she had something to be painting, if she had something she needed to be doing, I was working right next to her. So it felt very normal to me to be creating all of the time. And my parents really emphasized making sure that I had, nice sable brushes when I was 8 years old, and that I had a professional easel, and that I had access to these materials, which ended up being really wonderful for me, of course, and was a lot of fun. And I think something else that's just like really essential about it is my grandmother is no longer with us, but I am so grateful that she was a brutal critic. So when I was painting with her, like even when I was 9, 10, she'd be like, what are you doing putting that highlight there? Like, get it together. And there was a lot of love in it, but I think that made me better suited to working as a professional artist, for sure.
Talk about going out and taking pictures. What questions or ideas drive your work?
So my picture taking process is really different depending on where I am, actually. So if I'm in, Philadelphia or Baltimore, a city that I know really well, then I'm able to go out looking and say, today I'm in the mood to find some old beat up trucks, and that's what I want to photograph. And I know if I go to this neighborhood or this couple of blocks, I'm going to find something good. But when I travel instead, I'm taking thousands of photographs and then kind of figuring out what I have later. And that really comes from my kind of overall philosophy of wanting to photograph the things that are mundane, the things that are not appreciated the way that they necessarily should be. So one thing that you'll see in a lot of my work is a lot of power lines. You'll see a lot of, kind of generic seeming storefronts. And I don't think that people stop to take the time to appreciate the amount of design work that goes into creating those signs and those storefronts. To us, they might seem kind of regular, but I think once you put that love and care into a paper cut, it makes people stop and actually really appreciate it. And hopefully then they can take that back once they're walking around in their own neighborhoods and start to appreciate some of those elements wherever they live. So when I'm traveling, I take, 1,000 photographs in a day or whatever. And then when I come home, it'll take usually several weeks before I'm ready to go back through and look at what I have. And I'll start to realize those trends. So I guess a good example of that would be when we were in Japan. It's a very work hard, play hard culture. And one thing that we noticed was it's socially acceptable there to get so drunk that you're like passed out on the sidewalk. People will walk by and they will see that and they'll say like, oh, you must be very important for you to have gone that hard on your Friday night. Which was something that a friend had to explain to me later, because I was like, I'm seeing all of these people, like, are they okay? And she's like, no, they're good. No one's going to bother them. So that was something that as when I came home a few weeks later, I was able to look through a lot of those photographs and say like, wow, I really did kind of inadvertently capture a lot of these people. And that's something that is regular there, but that you wouldn't think of as beautiful and isn't exactly, but is worthy of documenting and is worthy of, being made into a piece of art.
Okay, I just want to tell everyone in the audience or our attendees, if you have questions for Rosa, please type them in the chat and I'll ask them later on in the presentation. Expectation reality, talk about that title and what that means to you.
So it's kind of funny, I guess, because expectation versus reality, the reality of this year is certainly different than all of us expected. And I pitched this show, several months back, a year back, and I had this idea that it was going to be, as I said in my little intro video there, like BuzzFeed type listicles, or like if you're on Pinterest and you see like, yes, I tried to make this Cookie Monster cake and here's how my cake came out, and you laugh at it because it's funny and it's good to be able to laugh at yourself. But it maintained, I think the collection maintained some of that playfulness, but really became about those, like, I guess that moment of self-reflection and just figuring out what it means to be a 30-year-old. And I just quit my day job, back in June, and trying to figure out what I'm doing with myself right now and taking on this ambitious goal of making art my full-time career, which so far so good, but it's definitely about finding yourself and just that sort of what goals you had for yourself, which I think at a young age are really heavily influenced by your family for sure. And then taking the time to reflect on what you actually want and what you actually want to be doing with your time.
At the beginning of the pandemic, how did you think you would approach your work? Did you say, okay, I have all this time in my hands, I'm just going to make something every day? What did you do?
Yeah, at the start of it, I was really excited to have the extra time and to be able to put that into my paper cutting. And I did a pretty good job of paper cutting almost every day at the very start of things, but I was also still teaching kindergarten through June. So of course that takes a lot of your time trying to teach kindergarten on Zoom. So I found that I was doing a lot of smaller works than I usually do. I was doing a 5x7 piece almost every day or every 2 days. And I don't usually like to work that small because I love getting caught up in the teeny tiny little details of things. But for me, it was just really nice to be able to finish something and have it be complete at the end of the day and know that something had gone correct in the way that I wanted it to, and that it was just done right. It felt, I don't know, very satisfying, definitely a control issue. But when, 2020 is happening all around you, that can be very helpful.
I want to look at some works. I selected some pieces that I want you to comment on. So we have some slides of them. They're selected works. Okay, This is After Party. Tell us about After Party.
Uh, a piece that's based on a photo I took in Portland, Oregon, and I'm not sure how well you guys can tell if you haven't seen the piece in person, but so it's in a black float frame and it's just between two pieces of plexi. So I really like that you can kind of see through it and it casts really great shadows on the wall. But I found this, food truck. I guess it's a trailer, but it clearly hasn't gone anywhere in years. When I was, what was that?
Oh, I said, I don't see any. It doesn't look like it's gone anywhere in years.
Oh, yeah.
It looks pretty stationary.
It's a little worse for the wear, but like, I think that's a good quality in a taco truck. But so I was in Portland because I had gone for a conference a couple of years before, and then my husband had a conference. So I was like, okay, he has conference. That means I can go and I can just have fun. But I think it was the idea of, when you're leaving a bar late at night and you just need that snack before you put yourself to bed. And you don't think of a food truck as a party, but there is a really communal aspect to it. If you have all of these people standing around and, everybody who's just been out having a good time hanging out with their friends. So it's everything that this taco truck represents, I guess, was something that kind of felt really joyful, even though it's in this dilapidated state.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay. Rest in pizza.
So when I finished 8th grade, my family decided to move from Philadelphia to the middle of nowhere in Vermont, which was a culture shock. But for about a year before we moved, we were going up, every other weekend to go look at the different areas in Vermont, see which town we might want to live in, eventually to start looking at houses and just to be able to spend time in that place because it's where my family really wanted to be. And we would go, after I finished school, after my parents finished work, Friday evening, we would drive up to Burlington, Vermont. And by the time we got there, most weekends, it was so late that the only thing that was open was this Pizza Hut and the Denny's that's next to it. So I ate in this Pizza Hut more than I would like to admit. And seeing it somehow, decrepit and having all this overgrowth and the cracks in the parking lot and the graffiti was just really satisfying to me because I am not a huge fan of Pizza Hut. And also, Vermont was just not a good fit for me. I'm a big city girl, so living in a rural area was a tough transition. So seeing it like this was just exciting because it was this combination of the things that I love about like pop culture, and Pizza Hut has like made some sort of a weird comeback, and you're starting to see Pizza Hut sweatshirts and sweatpants and all this stuff coming out now. So it's that and the graffiti, and it just really spoke to me. But of course, when I was out there taking pictures of it and I've got my camera and I'm like getting down and getting all of these angles, I've got people driving by like, what on earth is this girl doing?
Talk about this a little bit because, just seeing it, we're not seeing it live. It looks like, it reminds me of like a block print. So what is cut and what is, like, what are we seeing? What are the shadows and what are actual holes in the paper?
Anything that you see that's cream is a hole in the paper.
Okay.
So I took my photograph, and this is 20 by 30 inches, so it's a pretty big one for me. But I printed out the photograph and I taped it onto that burgundy paper, and then I cut through it. So everywhere that you're seeing that cream is one of the holes that I made. So you see those thin slats, especially in the windows where the blinds are kind of behind the shutters. You can see one of them. And just cutting all of those details in the grasses and being able to capture all of those textures in the leaves and everything was a good time sink.
Yeah, there's so much detail, so much intricacy. Do you remember how long it took you to complete this?
Oh, I actually intentionally do not time myself. So every time I start to work on a paper cut and time myself, I get to this point where I'm like, I totally think I can finish this in 6 hours. And then, 20 hours later, I'm ready to pull my hair out and trying to figure out how I'm nowhere close to where I thought I would be. So for my sanity, I don't time myself at all. But this one definitely took a long time. Anything with foliage for me takes a very long time.
Michael Dorfman says, this is amazing. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Now I have to let everybody know I knew exactly where this is. Rosa resides in my hometown of Baltimore, Maryland, And this is Baltimore Street, the block. This is Baltimore's red light district. So I recognize that. Not that I spent a lot of time on it. But,
In the middle of the city, it's hard to avoid.
and I love it because it looks so retro. So talk about shooting that and the people who were there or not there when they saw you taking pictures.
Yeah, I mean, I think the gold definitely adds to that retro vibe, but it's kind of these, all of these signs. You have to try and picture them when they were shiny and new, and now they just look so, to me, unappealing. But it was just a funny experience walking around because I, brought my husband with me and I was like, I want to go photograph this area. There's so many great signs. Like, I love that palm tree and how it turns into the wave and the O in the Oasis sign. But as I started taking pictures, like, we're hearing all of these whispers around us, like, yo, she's taking pictures. Look at that girl. Like, what's she doing? And all of the, I guess, security guys who are standing around out front are just slowly creeping back inside the buildings. Like, everybody who was outside smoking their cigarette, taking their break, whatever, is like turning and facing a wall so I can't see their face, or they're going inside. And I was like, what do these people think I'm doing? Like, I can make your faces unrecognizable if you want. It's a paper cut.
What time of day were you there?
Oh, it was probably, 2:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah. The car lends a retro aspect too. It looks like a 70s, at least that part of it looks like a 70s model car.
Yeah. I'll wait until traffic is out of my way. And then sometimes I intentionally want to be able to get some of those. I think they just add a nice dynamic component, and that car was for sure a good fit.
Okay. F this. This is so funny to me. Now, this is one of Rosa's paper towel paper cuts. And, I love the message on this delicate, it looks like a lace doily. Tell me about F this. And was this made during the pandemic?
This was made before the pandemic, actually. It was just one of those, like, I was started working on it during one of those long weekends where I really did not want to go back to work on Monday. And sometimes, you like have that feeling on Saturday and you're like, I'm not ready for this. I need more time. So I think that's kind of where the F this came in. And it ended up being kind of funny because typically I would feel that I needed to restart a paper towel like this because it has some of those tears, like you can see up in the top and the bottom of the E.
Mm-hmm.
There's a piece that tore apart, but I think with the message of F this, that was just so fitting. Yes. And I liked that balance of torn and kind of shredded with the really delicate lace and the, the script font of it.
What's your favorite brand of paper towel? What did you say?
Oh, what is my favorite brand of paper towel?
Uh-huh.
I actually don't know. So as I mentioned, I left my day job back in June. And before I left, as I was cleaning out my classroom, I jacked a pack of these paper towels because they are the best paper towels I have ever found for paper cutting. So I think I've got, a good stack of them right now. But before that, like everywhere I was or if I was, out somewhere and I went to the bathroom and I dried my hands and I was like, I feel the texture of the paper towels and play with them. People probably thought I was crazy, but try and decide, if it was a good texture of paper towel for cutting. So I would take a couple samples and go home and play with them. But these paper towels were the best ones. Unfortunately, there's no labeling on there, so I can't give credit to Georgia Pacific or whoever.
So, okay. I love this because it's so detailed. This is on a little paper shopping bag, and you can see the detail. You can see the guy's expression.
Yeah, his expression is definitely what made me snap that shot. And this was at the fair in Frederick, Maryland, and it was a shot that I took on purpose. I was kind of walking around taking a lot of pictures just because when you're at a fair, there's so much movement and you never know when you're going to get a person standing at the right angle or what's going on. But I saw him and I was like, instantaneously, I have to get a couple shots of him. And he just looks so annoyed. And I thought that was perfect. And I have no idea if it has anything to do with her, but I'm like, okay, she's standing at the ATM. Is it some sort of a disagreement about spending? Is he just having a bad day? Is he tired of walking around? but I really like pieces where you want to know what someone is thinking. You know, so often I'm trying to tell a specific story in my paper cuts. And this is one where I just don't know. I don't know what the story is, but it really intrigued me.
Well, Jill Lotion says, we miss you. Your art is unbelievable.
I'm
So,
sorry for stealing paper towels, Jill.
okay. You have to talk about every detail on this and the inspiration for this.
So this was one of the pieces that I had envisioned for this exhibit pretty early on. And I was thinking about like Burger King paper crowns and what is typically, I guess, the contrast between the jobs that we set out to have for ourselves and where we sometimes land. I have a lot of very well-educated friends who are, you know, waiting tables as a second job or doing whatever, because that's just the reality of these times. And so I was thinking about that, and that's kind of where the brooms came into play. But then there are also these, this revival of craft beer. So there's the Delirium Tremens up in the front. There's a Victory Brewing Company beer. So it was this like thinking about our spending, you know, the expensive lattes over on the sides there of the Delirium beer, and the birds from Twitter are, you know, constant consuming of information and being on the internet. But with what are we supposed to be doing? You know, what are we supposed to be working hard at? And if we are working, what is it that we're working for? Are we working to be able to save and have a mortgage if we don't buy that latte? Or are we just trying to live in the moment and enjoy ourselves? So at the bottom there in the script, I don't know if you guys can read it from here. It just says employee of the month repetitively. But it, you know, I've tried it on, it fits.
Okay. And I think, is that the last one? Yep, that is the last one. I'm gonna take some of the questions. Jimmy James Green asks, have you ever tried using your work for stenciling or other types of printmaking processes?
I have done wood block cutting based on one of my paper cuts, but I cannot use these. These are a Canson pastel paper. It's about 98 pounds. So it's lighter than cardstock, heavier than a regular printer paper, but it definitely would not hold up for stenciling. I'm really very process oriented. So I enjoyed the carving of my wood block, but the printing, I was kind of like, and I just don't, for me, it's that initial creation and figuring out how to get it done. So I don't make prints of any of my work. You won't, you know, if you purchase a paper cut, that's the one and only one from that photograph. It will never exist again in any other format for me.
Bryn asks, how do you capture a sense of motion in your work? And do you ever do portraits?
I do portraits. I do commissioned portraits. The woodblock that I did was actually also a portrait. So I had originally done a paper cut portrait of my husband, and then I turned that into a woodblock. So now I have a 4-foot version of him hanging out in my guest bedroom. And I think in terms of capturing that movement, it's kind of, if you recall the red and gold paper cut that you saw of downtown Baltimore, of the block as we call it, you know, part of why I waited until that car was in that shot was because I wanted to get some movement in there. It just felt very static otherwise. So it really depends on what kind of a feeling I'm trying to evoke with a paper cut, but including people, including something where it looks like there's dialogue or something where someone is mid-step is really a good way for me to add something and add some movement into a still image.
Nathia Lee asks, Philly is such a creative environment. Has the city influenced your work at all?
Oh, for sure. I've done a lot of paper cuts of Philadelphia. Before the pandemic, I was there about once a month. I still exhibit in Philadelphia fairly regularly. And I spoke a little bit about, you know, my attraction to graffiti with the Pizza Hut paper cut. But I had a funny thing happen where I started taking pictures of, if you know, in Philadelphia, like 10th Street, there's a lot of box trucks that deliver to the Vietnamese, all of the different Asian markets over there. So I had taken a picture of one of them and paper cut it. And somehow, I don't know, somebody found it, if I had used some sort of graffiti Philadelphia tag. And all of these graffiti artists started talking to me online and trying to figure out what my process was and where I was exhibiting my work. And, you know, now I have one of them who said like, okay, the next time you're in town, let me know, because I'm going to go bomb your area. That way you can cut my tag next, because I don't understand why you cut this guy and not me.
Started a battle of graffiti artists.
I did. I'm causing problems.
And you have an exhibit coming up in Philadelphia. Tell us about that.
Yes, on Saturday, it's a group exhibition at the National Liberty Museum called Philly's Freedom. So I have a couple of pieces in that, including a piece that I did that's actually based on a photograph I took here in Baltimore following the uprising resulting from the murders of Breonna and George and countless others. So it was a picture that I took on the way to the protest, and it has, I don't know if I can curse on here, like F12 graffitied on the side of a bus stall. And this man just looking really, I guess, kind of dejected, sitting waiting for a bus. I don't know if he was going to work or, at the end of his day. But so that's one of the pieces that I was really excited to have included in that show about, we think of, well, whatever associations we have with freedom, there's another side to that. So I was kind of highlighting that as my exploration of freedom for the exhibit.
Sharon Pandana asks, cutting is so exacting, requires dexterity. Was there something in your childhood that hinted at or offered a scintilla of what was to come?
I think I grew up always doing art. I started painting with my grandmother from a very young age, but I was also sewing and learning to upholster things and knitting and taking stone carving classes and working in clay. And I just have always been attracted to anything where you can make something. And it's something that I've always been able to lose a lot of time in. So I think that was also something, probably part of why my parents prioritized it, is that it was a good way to keep me busy as an only child and sometimes living in small apartments or whatever else was going on. If I was making something, I was happy. So that was definitely, I guess, the start of it.
Someone says the personal is political was a statement associated with feminism. Do you see political statements in your personal observations? Also, are you aware of the paper cutting work of Kara Walker? And if so, what do you think of her work? That's a lot.
That is a two-part question. Yes. So it's actually an interesting question for me because I didn't really start thinking of my work as political until I started taking some more time to meditate and reflect on what I was doing in quarantine. I think I had always just been capturing whatever was around me and wanting to spend time bringing attention to the things that I grew up around and the places that were important to me or the things that were interesting to me. And then, now that I have had this time to step back and reflect, realizing that my own perspective as somebody who is Black, Puerto Rican, Jewish, that is political. That wherever you're coming from, I don't think it's impossible to separate. And especially if you look at my body of work as a whole, I think you get to see like a real clear portrait of me, which was not really my intention, although I guess it kind of was, and that I was trying to capture, the things that I valued. The second part of that question was about Carol Walker. Yes, I do know her work. Her work is very different than mine in that she works in silhouette primarily. Of course, she does large-scale installations and things like that as well. But I think she sets out to make historical and political works in a way that I don't. It's very interesting, and I especially love the scale of the work that she does, oftentimes working very, very big. Haven't gotten to see enough of it in person.
Okay. And one more question is, does paper cutting ever get tedious? It looks like with your paper towel pieces, it looks like a lot of the same cutout patterns. Does it ever get tedious for you, or is it not tedious?
Things like the paper towels can get pretty meditative. I don't find those tedious. It can get tedious if I'm doing a lot of brick work, I guess, because it seems like they're just little straight lines, but bricks are never, ever uniform. So you have to pay really close attention, even though you're cutting just such small sections. And, even though you're making a million little straight lines, you never know when one's going to have a tiny jut in it. But I think capturing those things in each little brick is really important to me. I think it gives a lot of character to the buildings. So that can become tedious, and foliage just because of the timing of it, but it's always such a big sense of accomplishment once I'm actually finished with it. And I get this like really awesome big reveal when I'm finished with a paper cut, because I'm cutting through the photograph. So I still see some of the gray, some of the black as I'm working. And then when I'm finished, I can peel that layer off, peel that photograph, and finally see what it is that I've created.
Okay. Elise Chance Musson, who happens to be my sister, asked, do you get a lot of paper cuts?
I do not. Every so often, but mostly that'll be like if I'm shuffling around in my studio looking for things, not too often related to the actual process of cutting paper. I think I've only cut myself with my knife once or twice. And the one time that I'm remembering was while I was working at an event and I was doing a live cutting demonstration and just got distracted talking to someone and then had to, sprint away and try and make sure I didn't get blood on my art.
Speaking of your studio, I want to take a look at some of your favorite things. So that is our final slide presentation.
While you're getting that up, I'm just going to mention I just put my email in the chat. So if anybody has questions or things that they would like to ask that we have not gotten to, or you're welcome to email me and reach out.
Also, it's to see more of Rosa's work, you can go to her website, which is rosaleff.com. Okay, these are two works. I want you to tell us the name of each and tell us what they are.
No. So the one on the right is The Discomforts of Travel, and that's based on an illustration from Leslie's Illustrated newspaper. So it's working from a historical image. These are both actually based on etchings. The one on the left is from Gustave Doré in The Wood of the Suicides. So when I first started paper cutting, I told you guys that very first one that I did was based on was for my children's book that I was creating for graduate school. And then I kind of realized I had a knack for it and that it was just a more cooperative medium than, painting or anything else, which I'm not particularly good at. So I started looking to these more complex images to see what I was capable of doing. So this was before I was making, any compositions of my own, but just seeing what I was able to capture. So it was really interesting to me on the left, looking at In the Wood of the Suicides, to see that you can see some of the agony in these faces. You can feel that kind of writhing as these people are transitioning into trees and getting stuck in place. And then on the right, also to be able to see, all of those textures that I was able to capture, that I was able to get that cross hatching and that I was able to play with shadow a little bit. So these really helped me figure out how to paper cut.
And these are two of your earlier works.
Yes. Yeah.
Talk about your knife and tell us what's in the jar.
That jar is full of blades. I should have dated it so I could know how long it is, but I go through a lot of, I use Excel blades, but they're like X-Acto number 11s if anybody's ever cut with those. And then the knife that I have on the left there is a Fisker's Fingertip craft knife. And it kind of looks like a ring pop. I really like the way that it wraps around your finger because it distributes pressure a little bit better. I feel it more in my wrist. So I'm able to cut for 4 or 5 hours without taking a break. Most X-Acto knives have a straight handle, or, it might have a little bit of a dip in there where your fingers press into it. But at the end of the day, your fingertips are just so sore from pushing and holding it in place. That I felt like I was having to stop maybe every 2 hours and take, a half an hour to roll my wrist around and hear some good cracking.
Okay. Are these some of your favorite papers? And talk about the type of paper you use, just in general.
For actually cutting into, I really prefer Canson. I think it's pronounced Maitiens. It's a 98 pound. It's for drawing paper. But for background papers, I can use pretty much anything. So a lot of these papers, like the yellow on the left and the green with the little gold flowers and then the red feathery one next to it, those are things that I purchased while I was traveling in Japan. Wherever I go, I buy paper. If I'm on vacation somewhere, I have to Google where the paper stores are. But in my studio, I have a section of my wall that I've got long dowels across and ropes going down the side. So I kind of fold my papers over that. I had been keeping them flat before, but then I was forgetting what I had. And I just like being able to have them on display. And every so often I'm working on something and I'll realize oh, I have totally the wrong paper with this, and I'll swap it out and, see something that speaks to me.
Okay. That's your workspace.
It is. This is my studio. I call it the Buttercup Lounge, my bright yellow wall over there. But I have a lot of, little mementos up and things from exhibits that I've done, shows I've participated in, old versions of my business card. And kind of up on the top on that shelf there, you can see on the right, I've got my Vermont maple syrup can that I've repurposed from holding my scissors, and sugar skull that my husband brought back for me from New Mexico. So It's just, I guess, things that make me smile, things that remind me when I'm getting frustrated with cutting the 10 millionth leaf that like, okay, I'm doing this because I get all of these exhibits and I get to have fun and share my work with people, and this will be worth it.
Yep, that's great. Let's talk about this work. This is Paul Scott is someone you like and you follow, and tell us why.
I really love ceramics. I like his work a lot because he takes these traditional transferware patterns, this blue and white china that is so recognizable, and then he mixes in these very contemporary elements. So even on the left here in this jug, you can see in one of the dots, it looks like a Walmart price tag. That's certainly not anything that's fancy or ordinarily worthy of China, but I just like that he's making these things to reflect current times.
I wanted to let you know that he wished you luck. I've reached out to him and he let me use these images. And this is from his Cumbrian Blues American Scenery series. The jug is called Sampler Jug Number 1, Stay Dirty. And the platter is Palestine, Gaza 2014 triptych. It's a piece, it's one of a triptych. So there are 2 more plates in the series. So.
I mean, it's definitely a source of inspiration. I think I'm doing something somewhat similar with things like my paper plates and my paper towels, of taking these, historical forms, these old lace patterns, which are often antique and the ones that I use, and then putting them on something that's so modern as a paper towel.
Okay. And that is the view from your studio. I recognize that view. You live in Federal Hill, which overlooks the harbor, and there's the Domino Sugar Factory. I love that.
Great place to be able to work. My favorite time of day to be in my studio is actually right at sunrise. And I just love the way that the lighting changes in the studio itself. And it's kind of funny because I don't often notice it as it's happening, even though I know that's like, if I wake up that early, I'm excited because I know I'm going to be in my studio at sunrise. But I'll be looking down at my paper and I'll get so caught up in what I'm cutting. And then I'll look up and realize that the light is changing and blind myself for a minute and not be able to go back to cutting. But instead be able to go outside and sit on my deck for a little while and just enjoy that gorgeous view.
Yeah, that's a great area.
Good place to watch storms too.
Yeah, I can imagine. What is something that you have yet to achieve, Rosa?
Ooh. It's a big question. I don't know. I've been, during this pandemic, I've been taking a lot of time to reach out to people that I want to work with and kind of say, hey, I know we're all home, your venue, your gallery, your museum, whatever it is closed, but when this is all over, let's work together. So it's been, one of the bonuses of being able to both be home myself, but also just knowing that other people are in front of their computer screens. It's like, okay, I know you're going to see my email. Let's make something happen.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I mentioned before that I got to spend that time in China, and it was really wonderful because I don't think that a lot of Americans really have a lot of exposure to paper cutting. So there isn't that automatic recognition of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But being in China was really exciting for me because there's paper cutting everywhere. There'll be a trash can that's wrapped in something that's modeled off of a paper cut, that they've made this steel bin around. And it's just such a part of everyday culture there that was something that was really intriguing to me. So I've been looking at potentially doing some work in other countries that all have big paper cutting traditions, like Switzerland and Mexico.
That's amazing that paper cut art is so entwined in, just ordinary things there. If you weren't making art, what would you be doing?
Teaching kindergarten. I was a kindergarten teacher for 8 years. I worked in public schools when I was in Philadelphia and at a private school here in Maryland. And I love that age. It's just so exciting when they're like new to school, even if they've been in preschool, like they feel like they're one of the big kids all of a sudden when they get to kindergarten and they're like, I have workbooks, like we're going to do this. And it's just watching like so much progress that happens in that 1 year. And it was a lot of fun to be able to, you know, work on some of my paper cuts during my lunch breaks or whatever else was going on. There's a folder in this exhibition called Homework. That's that manila file folder with the kind of Lisa Frank sparkly blue purple background paper on it. And that was a piece that I actually started while I was in a staff meeting. I was just doodling on this folder as people were speaking. And so it was kind of those two overlapping selves, and really just realizing that it was time to transition.
Well, that's it. I don't have any more questions. Is there anything you'd like to express that I might not have asked you?
I think that's it. I'm, you know, thank you guys for all coming out. It was good talking with you. Please reach out to me if you do have questions. My email address is rosaleff@gmail.com, and there's plenty more on my website. As Julia mentioned, I have a show opening at the National Liberty Museum on Saturday, and then also November 7th, I have another solo exhibition that's kind of the follow-up to this one at the Washington County Arts Council, and that show is titled The Pursuit of Happiness.
Also, if you're in the Alexandria area or in the DMV, come to the Art League at the Torpedo Factory to see Expectations Reality. You really have to see it in person. It's incredible. And it will be up until November 8th. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Have a good evening.
Thank you.